Hello, I'm Femi OK, and you're in the stream. Today, a topic that we've already received a lot of criticism for, and we haven't even aired yet. We're asking Israelis how they view the Nakba, events that forced hundreds of thousands of Palestinians out of their homes. Now, we've received a lot of criticism for deciding to cover this angle of the Nakba. Every year, Al Jazeera covers this topic in great depth, and right now we have a special series airing on the network that looks at Palestinian dispossession and the ongoing conflict. So our aim is not to diminish the tragedy of the Nakba and what it means to Palestinians. So we ask our community to keep an open mind as you join in the conversation. Our digital producer, Malika Bilal, will also be keeping an eye on all of that. Malika, we have been getting a lot of reaction before even this show aired for a second. What are you hearing right now?
And even members of our community are differing on this topic and what it will mean. Dahlia, I'll read a couple of the tweets. She tweets in, 1,000 plagues on AJ Stream. Another one from Dina, who says, why does AJ Stream think it's appropriate on this solemn Remembrance Day for Palestinians to hold a discussion among Israelis about whether and how they should acknowledge the savagery they perpetrated against the indigenous people of the land they now occupy? It's interesting, those tweeters got some pushback from other members of our community. We'll go into that during the show. But of course, for those of you at home, this is a live conversation. So we want to hear from all of you. Join us with the hashtag AJStream.
And with us in the studio, we have Adria Abu Shahade, and she's a Palestinian activist. Adria, welcome to the stream.
Thank you so much.
Welcome to the hot seat as well. How do you explain that reaction that we got from Palestinians online to the idea of even doing this discussion?
Clearly, I understand that sentiment, and I think it's completely legitimate that people would get upset about sort of the unconventional way that we're deciding to treat this topic today. But it's important to remember a few things. First of all, to me and to many other Palestinians, the Nakba is an ongoing event. Does not only relate to the events that occurred between 1947 and 1948, but it's an ongoing event that includes the continuous dispossession of Palestinians today, the situation of refugees across the Arab world. And so to have this conversation without including the perpetrators of violence against Palestinians is to have a conversation between preaching to the choir. And I think including Israelis will shed light, in the conversation will shed light to many people about what the role the Zionist movement Israelis have played and what role they can play.
So let's get to that conversation. Every year, while Israelis celebrate their Independence Day, Palestinians around the world mark the 1948 Nakba, or catastrophe, where more than 750,000 were driven out of their homes in the conflict surrounding the creation of the State of Israel. Now, more than 450 Palestinian villages were destroyed, and today there are more than 5 million Palestinian refugees registered with the United Nations. In the 65 years since, Israeli attitudes towards these events have included denial, justification and repentance. So how does today's Israeli view the Nakba? Joining us today in our Google Hangout is Canadian-Israeli filmmaker Leah Tarachansky. Her documentary, 7 Deadly Myths, deals with the 1948 war that created the State of Israel. Amos Gaver is also an Israeli filmmaker, and he joins us from Tel Aviv. Eitan Bronstein is the director of Zokrot, or Remembering. On their website, they describe themselves as an organization seeking to raise public awareness of the Palestinian Nakba, especially among Jews in Israel. And in Tel Aviv, we have Ran Bario Ban Yoshafat, who is a lawyer. Welcome to the stream, everybody.
Thank you. Hi.
Eitan, you are in Israel right now. I just want to get a feeling of what Israelis talk about on Nakba Day.
Yes, first of all, I have to make clear that most of Israelis, until today, even when the word Nakba is known quite much more than, let's say, 10 years ago, before we as a whole started working, even today, most of Israelis think that Nakba is a word in Arabic, which is the name of the creation of the State of Israel, and not that is a catastrophe of the expulsion and destruction of most of the Palestinian localities.
So in that conversation that you're having, there's just a complete misunderstanding of even the word as far as you're concerned. And Leah, this really was part of the documentary that you've been making and you've been working on about the 7 deadly myths surrounding the 1948 conflict. When you talk to Israelis about Nakba Day, how do they react?
Sure. We actually did an experiment when we were filming this film about 2 years ago, where we went on the streets of Tel Aviv and Beersheba and many other places. And we simply asked Israelis if they can explain why this day is important, and if they can just describe what they learned about this day in their schools. And what we found was the same thing that I learned when I went to school, which is the sort of black and white portrayal of the founding of the State of Israel, where, 3 years after the Holocaust, as a miracle of David versus Goliath, when the entire Arab world united against us, we managed to somehow win a little piece of land from that aggression. And since that day until today, we're fighting off the Arab world, and the Palestinians were trying to destroy us. And that's sort of the narrative that we learn in school. That's the narrative that is more or less accepted. And even in the last 20 years, when there's been a lot of information coming out with the new historians and with Zachot and with other, with the Nakba law and all kinds of other things, still the prevailing myths, what Simcha Flapan in 1987 called the 7 founding myths of the State of Israel, still prevail. And they're still very strong in the way that Israelis see the founding of their own state and their own position in the Middle East.
Ran, does that resonate with you? Did you learn that about the Nakba in school at all? Was it even a word that was used?
Yes, it was a word, but I'm very happy that Eitan and Leah spoke before me. The real Nakba, the real catastrophe, is that 65 years after Israel was re-established, the Palestinians still do not recognize Israel as the state of the Jewish people. To say it's an ongoing process, it is. It's still, people are not willing to protect me on any border, and to say that we don't learn about it in Israel, I think is a joke. Every big newspaper in Israel will publish today and the day before, and probably also tomorrow, events about the Nakba. I was almost late for this interview because the road was closed because of riots. So.
We're talking about the Nakba, and it's that precise term that's sparking a lot of conversation on words. On Reddit, on the Israel subreddit, Jay Boyce says, by calling it the Nakba, I think you have already shown what your prejudices are, and they're speaking about AJ Stream. And that gets a reply from Sunshine, who says, a comment such as this is precisely why we need to teach more than just the preferred narrative for our side. Abdullah on Facebook says, the term independence denotes being freed from a colonizer. Israelis were not colonized by any country whatsoever. They simply decided to take what never belonged to them. And Azria, another one on words, Kate Sharad says, I think it's absurd to propose that the Israelis use the term Nakba. To them, it's the war for independence, and they had their reasons. So I think this begs 2 questions. One, this is clearly more than semantics. This is more than just words. And 2, what do you say to this argument when you hear that they had their reasons?
I mean, I think that the argument of this many people were dispossessed and this much suffering was caused to this big of a population, that someone could talk about such a catastrophe that shattered an entire society as being justified, merits very little consideration or even response, because I don't think I would be taken very seriously if I sat here and I said, oh, the massacre of Bosnians in Srebrenica was unfortunate, but it was justified. So that's that. And I think you're right about your point in terms of semantics, and I don't think that this is conversation about semantics. I don't think that the Palestinians of the world are up in arms about Israel using their term. I think it's a question of responsibility and taking action to rectify what has been done to the Palestinian people between 1947 and 1948 and to this day. And this includes the occupation of the West Bank, it includes the siege on Gaza, and it includes the racism and discrimination that 1.5 Palestinians, almost 2 million actually Palestinians in Israel continue to experience.
Right. Eitan, one of the aims of your organization is really to spread understanding and knowledge of the Nakba to Israelis. I want to show a little clip of a leaflet campaign that you did actually just back in April, so April the 15th. And what's happening is you're handing out leaflets to show Israelis in Tel Aviv what areas that they may know of very well were formerly Palestinian areas. and the action was very violent. Just have a listen to this.
הם בעד שחיילים יעקבו, בעד הנכבה, והערבים אומרים הנכבה. תגיד לך בושה בכלל? בגללך אין בושה. מה אתה יורק אליי? בגללך אנשים נהרגים. בגללך אנשים נהרגים. אין לך בושה, תגיד. גיס חמישי, בגללך אנשים נהרגים. אם תיגע בי... די, לירוק, זה יום עצמאות. מה שאתה עשית כרגע? ביום עצמאות אח שלי נהרג בצבא בגלל כאלה. בגלל כאלה אח שלי נהרג בצבא.
So this Tel Aviv resident is spitting. He says, "Don't hit me." He is furious. Can you explain the anger that Israelis feel about understanding in 1948 in a different way?
Yeah, of course I can understand these people, like this quite unusual reaction that we got, quite violent, from this guy. He was taught all his life that we are the only moral people and democracy in the Middle East, and all the rest of us of the Middle East are savages or something like that, and they always wanted to kill us. And of course, when we as Zohro try to bring new facts, you know, and evidences, also by Palmach fighters or Haganah fighters that were telling us that expulsion, that they expelled people, they expelled civilians, they shot into mosque in Lid, what is now Lod, and etc., etc. Yes, it's really shaking many Israelis, that's like this young guy that reacted so violently.
So, Amos, yes, sir. Leah.
Join in.
Yeah, everybody wants to join in. Let's do one at a time. I think there's Leah first of all, and then we go around the Google Hangout. Off you go, Leah.
Sorry, I just wanted to say that in the film that I'm working on, I'm profiling people who were veterans of 1948, and I think that what Eitan is speaking about is particularly important, especially because of what Amos said earlier about the Arab world not recognizing the Jewish state, because the very oh, sorry, sorry. Because the very idea that in the end of the day, the discussion here, the debate is not actually about the word itself or independence or what happened in 1948 itself. I think that he hit the nail on the head. The discussion is about the legitimacy of having a Jewish state and how that state was created. And I'm not saying that Jews don't have a right to have their own state. That's not what the debate is about, and unfortunately that's what the Israeli establishment makes it about victimhood and this idea that we don't have a place and we don't have the legitimacy to have our own place. That's not what the discussion is about. If you go and you look at the minutes of the discussions of all the committee meetings that were formed right after 48, if you go and you look at the diaries of the people who were later our Minister of Defense, our Prime Minister, our first leadership, the people who did the Nakba, what they constantly talk about is to have as much land as possible with as few of the indigenous Palestinians as possible. And when you understand that that is the actual concept of the Jewish state, that the Jewish state is built on the idea of having as much of biblical Canaan, or greater Israel as they call it, as possible with as few people as possible, you can understand what's going on in the West Bank. And that is what Palestinians are contesting. And that is what is so hard for us to understand as Israelis, because we're not actually having a discussion of two different, opinions of the same thing. We're having totally different discussions. While we're saying we want to have the legitimacy to have our own state, what we think we're hearing the Palestinians saying is you don't. But what they're actually saying is you can have that state, but why do we need to be expelled of the land that we've been living on for centuries for that state to exist?
Amos?
Yeah. Well, first, if I can just reply to things that were said before. I think that in general, when you have a discussion about myths and nationality, you can't go both ways. You either believe in nationality and in the myths that go along with it, and then you believe the Palestinian myths and nationalities and the Israelis, or you don't. But you can't have it both ways. You can't not believe the myths of one nationality and believe the myths of the other. I think in many cases, in commemorating events of the Nakba, people use myths just as the Israelis use, but people decide to adopt one myth and not the other. And I think that's a very problematic situation.
Eitan, I want to bring you in here and on the discussion of whether or not this is top down, and if it's a symptom of government first. Ophir Gundelman tweets into the stream, should Israelis celebrate the Arab and Palestinian failure to destroy their newly reborn state in the Arab-initiated war of 1948? No. And Ophir, of course, is a government spokesman. Sana Saeed then tweets in, is it possible to spread awareness about the Nakba amongst Israeli Jews without undercutting the founding narratives of Israel? And that seems to go against the tweet from Ophir we just read. But there's also a video comment asking that same question. Have a listen, Eitan.
I don't think Israelis are ready to include the Palestinian Nakba tragedy into their independence narrative. Serious violations of human rights continue to go on in Israel, the West Bank, and Gaza. To name one specifically, last November, there were attacks on civilians, unlawful attacks on civilians from both sides, leaving at least 104 Palestinians dead and 4 Israelis dead. So this ongoing conflict and violence just show no sign of coming close to a resolution, let alone Israel recognizing al-Nakba.
So Eitan, she says that it shows no sign of eventually recognizing this. Do you think that that's true, and are the younger generations changing?
Yes, I'm sure that's it's not the whole truth to say that all Israelis don't want to know anything about it, and no, I think it's wrong. We were today commemorating the Nakba in Jaffa. 2 days ago there was a big commemoration by students in Tel Aviv University, Arabs and Jews commemorating together in a very Jewish space, I would say, in a place that was a Palestinian village until 1948, Sheikh Mohamed's village. And it's well recognized by many Israelis. And I think in a way, even the denial of today, sometimes it really sounds absurd, because they say, on one hand, they call it Nakba as one important, yes, they published Im Tirtzu, it's an important movement to deny the Nakba. They published this booklet in Hebrew called Nakba Charta, and it's more or less Nakba, and they say this didn't exist. On the other hand, they are singing that we are going to bring another Nakba upon you. They sing this terrible song, promising furthermore expulsions and killings by many racists in Israel. So, but still, it's so absurd. Yes, and many Israelis acknowledge and recognize that these lies cannot continue forever. And we know, we read testimonies by Palmach fighters, hundreds of testimonies taken by themselves, by Palmach people. 30 years ago, they are buried and hidden in the Palmach archives, and they don't publish them because they, by themselves, are telling in the interviews how they expelled civilians and how they prevented their return until today.
And I think the knee-jerk reaction, like the one we saw in the video that Eitan, I think, brought, of the man cursing in the street, comes from a place of concern, because there is that conflict between what Israelis know to be true, because so many fighters have come forward, and for example, what he was talking about, but also in Leah's documentary, and the idea that maybe this, like these facts coming forward, will undercut Israel's legitimacy. But I want to go back to something Amos said that was a little bit problematic, I think. He talked about different national myths, and while it's true that nations and states build themselves on these myths and need them to sustain themselves and to survive, I don't think that the conversation really is about myths in this case. And I think that we have to give some credit to historians, and particularly revisionist Israeli historians that went back to the archives and really challenged these national myths and challenged them through historical and archival research. And I'm talking about historians like Ilan Pape and Benny Morris. So there is an element of myths that plays into historical narratives, but there are also facts that are agreed upon between international scholars, Israeli archives, and historians, that there has to be an established baseline of, yes, 800,000 Palestinians were dispossessed. Yes, 500 Palestinian villages were destroyed. And so this is, I think, what we need to work towards.
And among those myths, of course, are the stories of the displaced people. Lena, live from Gaza, tweets in, "My grandma lived the Nakba. She and her family were expelled from Majdal to Gaza. She summarized their pre-Nakba life by saying, 'We were happy.'" Now, with that, I want to go back to our Google Plus Hangout because I know, Ron, you're dying to get in. Go ahead.
Thank you. I have 6 short points. First of all, my name is...
Ran, can I just make your 6 short points maybe 1 brilliant point?
Yes, it's going to be 1 brilliant point.
Yeah, 1 brilliant point, and then we can do the others in the post show. We can do the 5 other excellent points in the post show.
I need 30 seconds.
Yeah, make your brilliant point right now. Go ahead.
Thank you. So it's very hard for you to pronounce my last name, which is Bar Yoshaphat, which translates to the son of Jehoshaphat. I have a connection to this land for 3,800 years, so I'm not trying to build up a narrative. This is where my family comes from. My hometown, Ramat HaSharon, has been here for 90 years, and before it was destroyed, it was here for 1,300 years. Now we need to talk. I'm very happy that Adria said what she said. The PLO say that they're Palestinian Arabs, and the only purpose of the whole concept of the Palestinian people is to destroy Israel so it can be divided again to Syria and Jordan and so on and so forth. Catastrophe was originally called when Syria was divided from what was then Palestine. Palestinians who were joined with the Nazis, who rejected the partition plan, Arabs who expelled 900,000 Jews from their Arab countries are saying that we caused them damage. And in Israel, to say that there's not equality in Israel when you have so many members of the parliament. Just last year, the #1 soldier in the commander's course was an Israeli Arab, a Muslim. That's ridiculous. No one is talking about how Palestinians in Lebanon have no rights, and in Syria how they have no rights, and in Egypt how they have no rights. In Israel, where they have the best rights, and not comparing to any other Arab country, but compared to Israel, they live in equality. That's where they complain. 2 more short things. In Israel, the past month, we had 140 terror attacks.
Ron, I need you to hold that thought, only because we have to wrap up the main show and then go to the post show, so that Adria is dying to get back in here. There are lots of people in the Google Hangout. We have lots of people online as well. There is one thing I want to pose to you, because we're going to pick up on Ran's 5 other points in the post show, but a couple of other things as well. I wanted everybody to be very honest in today's program, and one of the things I wanted to ask you so that we can carry this conversation over is, if you could say something to an Israeli about Nakba Day, there would be no repercussions. You could say whatever you liked and you were very honest. I want you to think about what you would say, Adria. I also want you, Leah and Amos and Eitan and Ran, to think about what you would say to a Palestinian about Nakba Day, and you were being very honest and there were no repercussions. I'm really curious to get your take on that, and we will do that in the post show. The conversation is going to continue on stream.aljazeera.com, and you can contribute to that conversation by making sure that you're in line. You've got, about 2 or 3 minutes to move if you're not already online as well. And also for information about the stream and what programs that we're actually doing and what themes and strands, go to the stream here at facebook.com/AJstream, put in all your comments and anything you want to add to this discussion, future discussions. This is where we get our program ideas from. As we wrap up this main show on the Nakba, I'm actually on aljazeera.com. If you type in Al Nakba here, and you will get to see one of the documentaries that we're running right now about Nakba, about 1948. Episode 1 is here, episode 2 is here, and it will fill you in on all of the Nakba history and give you a more conventional take on this very, very sensitive period in history. What are we doing tomorrow? At what point do popular memes become racist? We look at the viral trend of memifying the African-American interviewee. So send us your thoughts. Stay with us. The post show is next at stream.aljazeera.com. See you there. Hello, I'm Femi. Okay, welcome to the Streams Online post show. As you can tell if you're watching the main show, the conversation only just got started. We still have Leah Tarachansky. She's a Canadian-Israeli filmmaker. Amos Gaver, he's an Israeli filmmaker. Arten Bronston is director of Zdokrot. That's an organization that helps to spread awareness about Nakba, particularly to Israelis. And Ron Barrio Bar Yoshfat, he's an Israeli lawyer who has so many points to make. Trust a lawyer to have 6 points to make right at the very end of the main show. Ron, I will come back to you, but Adria was dying to get into the conversation, so Adria, jump right in.
Yeah, well, he said a lot of things. Some were more amusing than others.
The one that resonated the most for you, that you feel you do want to push back on, is what?
I just want to quickly say that I'm not questioning his personal connection to his hometown or to historical Palestine. It's a known fact that that there was a community of Jewish people living in Palestine. So that's not up for debate, and I don't think many Palestinians would debate that. But I was actually interested in responding to his points about Palestinian citizens of Israel. As a Palestinian citizen myself, I don't really appreciate the kind of tokenization that was thrown around about there's Palestinian representatives in the Israeli Knesset, or there's a Palestinian soldier. This is tokenization, and this is problematic. And it becomes an issue when we fail to listen to the minorities when they're trying to tell us that they are being discriminated against. And from my personal experience, from my experience of my father, and I've also worked at an organization that advocates for the rights of Palestinians from Israel, there is very much institutional, structural, social, economic, educational discrimination that this community that as a community we're continually exposed to, and one form of these discrimination is the lack of education about our own history, our own family's history. The word Nakba, and not just the word, but really the impact that it had, the shattering of Palestinian society, is not allowed to be taught in Israeli schools, and this includes the schools that are for Palestinians, so the Arabic language schools. Even though, the Israeli education system is focused on teaching the heritage, tradition, religion, and history of the Jewish people. So where do we come in that? And that's a type of cultural discrimination that as an indigenous community, we continue to experience.
I'm not going to jump back to Ron, because Ron, I feel you're probably pretty convinced of your own argument, but let me jump to Amos and ask you to just respond there, Amos.
Yeah, look, the issue of racism in a society is an issue that arises in every place you can look. There's no country in the world where there's no racism in society. In some cases, it's worse than others. I don't think that Israel has an issue of racism that's more or less than in America, in Europe, in South America, anywhere across the world. Racism you can find anywhere. I think about institutionalized racism. That's a problematic statement. Given the fact that Israelis, Jewish or Arab or Palestinian or whatever you want to call it, or non-Jewish and non-Arab, there are other citizens in Israel that are not Arab and not Jewish. They all have equal rights, as far as the law is concerned, and as far as the.
See, this is where we.
If I can just finish my point.
All right, Amos, you finish your sentence, and then we've got some groaning going on. We've got Adria here, so let's do Amos, groaning, Adria. Okay, Amos, finish your sentence.
Okay, I'm not going to groan. I just want to say that besides that fact, I think the important thing that you're doing today in the show, and I wish that there would be more situations like this, is having a discussion with people from other sides and other opinions, because in many cases I interact with Palestinians and I see a great communication between Israelis and Palestinians, but in some cases I see events of boycotting and not willing to sit with the other side, not willing to talk and understand the other side. I think that's the main point that is a barrier to us being able to live together in peace.
Who was groaning? Was that Eitan groaning?
Yes.
Eitan.
Also,
I just want to comment that this institutionalized racism that of course exists in Israel, not only on the cultural level, but also on the governmental level, in the law of return, for example. There are so many examples, and it's been reported by governmental committees, like by Or Committee, for example, and many other reports by the government itself. So Israel is based on racism. Israel is a state only for Jews. only Jews can be full citizens in Israel.
I mean, my
Israel know it.
My partner is not Jewish.
I just want to say something.
She has the same rights as you?
Okay.
Well,
Leah, hold on 1 second. Amos, what were you going to say?
I'm saying my partner is not Jewish. She's not an Israeli citizen, but when she will become an Israeli citizen, she will have full rights just as anyone else, and there's no problem with that.
Leah.
I think one of the things that when people talk about the Nakba and what it means to have a Jewish state, I think a lot of the confusion about racism in Israel and institutional racism comes from the fact that even as Israelis, oftentimes we're not very aware that the 4 laws on which the state of Israel is based are the 4 defining laws that define our society and our legal structure. Eitan mentioned one of them, which is the law of return, which says that any Jew anywhere in the world can become an Israeli citizen automatically. Of course, Palestinians and their descendants and refugees and their descendants are not privileged to the same right. The other law that passed immediately after the Nakba had happened defined basically that the land on which Israel sits will be belonging in the trust and in the benefit of the Jewish people. The absentee properties law basically blanketly took all of the properties of all the refugees and transfer them to the state. We have laws basically that go right into effect immediately after the Nakba, like the anti-infiltration law of 1951. Huge laws, basic laws that define immediately after more than 2/3 of the Palestinians become refugees in a span of a year and a half, that the people who remain will have a different set of rights. And when we're talking about different set of rights, these 4 laws establish that the land of Israel is a Jewish state for the benefit of the Jewish people. And therefore, since then, more than 60 different laws have passed that specifically designate different laws for Jews and non-Jews.
Right.
So when people talk about discrimination, this is what they're talking about. And this is all part of the same process of dispossession.
You know, the varying views that we're hearing here made one thing evident for one member of our community. Lena, live from Gaza, says, AJ Stream, you just showed that most Israelis still refuse the basic facts about how their state was established. Some more voices. Noor says, the Nakba either becomes the narrative or it doesn't for Israelis. There's no such thing as including it in independence narrative. And the last one, Adria Kabir says, it's a Cold War on AJ Stream. Either way, there won't be any rectification because the West has its arms around Israel, taking us into a whole other conversation and topic. But Adria, I want your thoughts on all of that you've just heard. You know, break this Cold War for us.
I mean, I wanted to address what Amos said, and I think it relates to what Lena said about the stream approaching this topic in this way. On one note, Amos complimented AJ Stream for taking this approach, but on the other, he completely dismissed my own experience, even though it's shared by Israelis that agree about institutional discrimination. So that makes me question, really, what is this value? And I feel like a lot of our viewers are questioning this. What is this value to opening this conversation if this is the kind of response? But of course, we have to also acknowledge Israelis and commend the work of organizations like Zochrot that are putting themselves out there and pushing back on the Zionist narrative.
I have a very short period of time left in the show, scarily short period of time, and I did ask you a question. If you could be very honest and tell Adria, you an Israeli, about Nakba Day, what would you say? And I'm really going to push you to make it a sentence. No notes needed, from your heart.
That's a hard one. I think until the Israeli people take responsibility, and by responsibility I mean action, to rectify the Nakba, then we will never see a resolution to this conflict.
Leah, from the heart, what would you say to a Palestinian to their face if you had to just have it in a sentence?
Well, I have no problem communicating with Palestinians. I think what I would want to say to my fellow Israelis is that ever since I started to understand 1948, I could finally understand what it was that was dividing our two peoples. And I think that that's crucial if we want to actually live together in a healthy way in the Middle East.
Eitan?
Yes, I would say to a Palestinian, please don't give up never the right of return. Because if you will give up the right of return, we as Israelis will have to continue living forever as colonizers and not as people who live in the Middle East as equals.
Ran?
My turn?
It's your turn, and there are no 5 points here, Ran. There's one sentence. I know you can do it for me.
I would say, Ahlan wa sahlan, just come meet me, come hang out with me. I'm a person, you're a person, we're all human beings. It's easier to interact, even if Andrea thinks I don't understand her narrative. Speak. It's much more difficult to hate when you're eating a cookie and drinking tea together.
And Amos.
My treat.
I might come to Tel Aviv just for that. Amos?
Well, I don't quite know what to say after that. I kind of know the milk and cookies, but in general, I mean, I said what I said. I think that when we're dealing with narratives, it's problematic to accept one and not the other. You either accept the fact that narratives are not real, or you accept the fact that they are. You can't do it both ways.
Well, and speaking of narratives, last word from the community. Rama tweets in, there might be multiple narratives, but there is one truth, Nakba. And a last one from Turk for Syria, who says, peace will happen when the rights of everyone are respected and not just Israeli Jews.
Thank you very much to all of our guests, to our community, for being part of this conversation. Tomorrow, what point do popular memes become racist? We look at the viral trend of memifying the African-American interviewee. That conversation cannot possibly be boring. In the meantime, we will see you online.